Let's bring in Gary Washburn from the Boston Globe, our very own Chris Forsberg, who looking very Miami-ish, both of you down there in Miami. Chris Forsberg, our Celtics insider, let's start with you. What was your reaction to the performance, if you can even call it that, put on by the Celtics in Miami last night?
Yeah, you nailed it, right? Like, just the adjectives, pathetic, embarrassing. Like, I don't understand how a team with this much talent just no-shows in a game of this magnitude, and especially just when you heard for 360 days about the pain of the finals and how they would do anything to get back to that moment, and then here they have the perfect opportunity and they can't do it. So, yeah, I don't think we need to scream it. It's embarrassing. It gives you great pause about where this thing is headed and what tweaks need to be made when they eventually do bow out of this thing. But, some teams you feel like, okay, maybe they could muscle their way back in. I don't get that vibe from this team based on their body language and actions on the court.
Gary, how do you feel? What was your initial reaction?
Yeah, I'm with Chris. It was ridiculous, embarrassing. They quit. It was like to the point where, like, late first quarter, you just saw it coming when they were down 30-22. And I just thought, like, they felt like everything they did, Miami had an answer for it. Like, they would make one small mistake, and Caleb Martin would have a small space. Boom, he hits a three. I think that one play where they saved it out of bounds, he saved it out of bounds, Bam Adebayo feeds Max Strus coming, he shoots from 30 feet, swish. Like, everything Miami did worked, and the Celtics in the second quarter said, that's it, we got nothing. We have no response to this. And so it was a humiliating effort for an organization that prides itself on Celtic pride and being the top organization in the league, and we don't give up, and the whole unfinished business mumbo jumbo that it's turned into.
Still unfinished.
Unfinished business, enter 18, like, all that's just words. These guys don't want to work hard enough. They've not responded to anything Miami's given them, and Miami's playing extremely well. Give the Heat credit. 50% from the three-point line, 51% from the field. I looked at this, 28 combined three-pointers from Martin, Vincent, and Robinson. The Celtics as a team have hit 31 in this series. So it's just incredible how well Miami has played, but the Celtics have not shown their best. They've shown their worst.
Yeah, and at the absolute worst time. Well, is there something bigger going on with the Celtics behind the scenes? Gary was a tweet machine last night, and he tweeted this in response to someone venting about Jaylen Brown's performance. He wrote, "I think it's more about this team's dysfunction and not the series. This has been building for months." Gary added, "Jaylen Brown is biting his tongue from telling his truth. You can tell he has a lot on his mind. There's some real issues in that locker room." Gary, what do you think the biggest issues in that locker room could be?
One, they just don't play defense. Two, I don't know how much they believe in Joe Mazzulla and what he's saying. And three, there's no one on the coaching staff holding them accountable because the coaching staff is very inexperienced. Not their fault, but Brad Stevens made the heinous mistake of not, adding when Damon Stoudamire left. You lose two NBA head coaches here. Ime Udoka, because of obvious circumstances, Will Hardy goes to Utah. Damon Stoudamire, the only experienced NBA guy on your staff, takes a Georgia Tech job. You do nothing to replace either of any of those three guys. You don't add a old head, as they call it, a veteran person, someone who can tell them what to do. So they have to believe everything that Joe is saying, and maybe they just don't believe it. And maybe some guys are on one agenda. Some guys feel like this is the way to win because they don't believe Joe's way to win. They're not playing defense. They're shooting too many damn threes. Nobody shoots a mid-range anymore. Like, all this stuff has just gone down the drain, and that's why this locker room seems to be really fractured.
Yeah, and I go back to it. I know they had a great start to the season, and it kept those expectations even after the Ime situation. But, Trenny, you know how I've been talking for 4 months now. Like, there were red flags along every turn about the way the team played, the inconsistencies, Joe's stubbornness with timeouts and the way he calls games. And I do think it's just all built to this point where they don't have any of the swagger they had last year. They have none of the defense, none of what made them so elite last season. And it's all all kind of come to a head here against a team that has an obvious way of playing, that has a desire, that has swagger. And so it's too bad. There's not a lot of easy answers to what ails the Celtics.
Welcome back in Chris Forsberg, our Celtic insider. Gary Washburn from the Boston Globe. Phil Perry joins me here as well. You can join in on this conversation about what is going wrong with the Celtics. We're going to keep this poll up a little longer than usual. We're going to have all the way, I think, till the next half hour to vote in this. You can cast your vote. Go to NBCSportsBoston.com/vote. You can also scan the QR code right there. Click on the early edition logo. What is the first change the Celtics need to make? Do they need to fire Joe Mazzulla? Break up the Jays? Maybe they need to trade Marcus Smart. I'm looking at Phil Perry over there. It's fine. No big changes necessary right now. Firing Joe Mazzulla, the early leader in the clubhouse by a mile at 62%. So, Phil Perry, I ask you, is it time for the Celtics to make a coaching change?
Well, not right this second, but yes, as soon as this series is over, and it's over, imminently here, yes, they need a new coach. They need someone who can guide them in such a way that they do have confidence in what they're doing. Eddie House is right, and he would know, right? It looks like they aren't bought in. They aren't bought into his message. They aren't bought into his philosophy. There's a number of X's and O's things that I'm sure Gary and Chris could tell us. But it feels like when we see Al Horford running the timeouts, or we hear about Marcus Smart with the whiteboard, or we hear from them after games or in between games about, oh my God, thank God, finally, they started Rob Williams, and then all of a sudden he's yanked from the lineup, and it looks like the team again isn't bought in Game 3. That to me tells me that his message is already less than 1 year into this job, Trenny, falling on deaf ears.
Chris Forsberg, I hated them taking the interim tag off of Joe Mazzulla at the midway point. I hated even more the extension they gave him. I didn't think he had proved anything in the first half. I thought we'd really find out who he was as a head coach here. And now I feel like the Celtics are boxed into a corner because they're literally going to have to pay Joe Mazzulla to go away. But I think they need to part ways with him. That is where it starts. What do you think, Chris?
So, and I don't disagree with what you guys have gripes with Joe, and I've been frustrated by some of his stubbornness with timeouts, with rotations, with just his general disposition at times when he gets kind of pressed on issues. But I will say this, I just cannot imagine the Celtics going to a fourth coach in 4 years. I think Brad Stevens, you have to remember, decided to put his neck out there for Joe and brought him in and then gave him the extension. I'm sure ownership doesn't want to have to pay to let someone go away. Now, maybe ultimately, if they come out with absolutely nothing in Game 4 and it's clear the players have truly quit on him, then that might just overrule everything and maybe all of this is moot. But I do think he has a relationship with Jason Tatum. They go out to dinner. They have a bond there, and I think Tatum is in his corner. But ultimately, the frustrating part is that this is a championship window, and you never know how long it's going to be open for. And the Celtics elected to go with someone who maybe wasn't ready for this role in the moment and have compromised their ability to be the best team they can be. And there does have to be a balance there. I think it's more likely they beef up his staff and give him some veteran experience next to him and hope that is enough before they cross a bridge. But, certainly I understand the frustration with it. I'll just caution one more thing. This is now 3 straight coaches that have been an issue. Like, Brad couldn't get through to him. Ime rode the roller coaster even as he got the tough love, but got more out of them than Joe has. And so I think it's a little bit more on the core as well.
Gary, do you think that they should make the drastic move of getting Joe Mazzulla? And if yes, is the way to do it the way that Chris just suggested? Like, did they set Joe Mazzulla up to fail, basically, by not surrounding him with a better supporting cast? And if they do that, might we see different results next year?
I do think they set him up to fail, but it could have been Mazzulla's decision not to want to add another assistant coach. Now, we have to figure out whether him or Brad or who made that decision not to add a veteran assistant. Believe me, Trenny, there's plenty of former NBA coaches out there doing TV, sitting at home, playing golf, who would have loved to join the Celtic staff and who would not have tried to stab Joe in the back and take the job. They would have just been a veteran assistant. I think that they do need to make a change if, one, they want to compete for a title next year. So the question is, do you let Joe continue to grow into the job, hoping that he makes a really big bounce from first year to second year? Or do you have to take advantage, which I think you do, of the Jays, okay, because you got to make a decision on Jalen, and then Jason, you're giving him a ransom next year, $318 million. you've got to win with this crew, okay? Now, you make some small changes in the offseason, but you need a coach in there that's going to come in there and be like, okay, we're going to the finals. Like, we're going to make changes. We're going to have a stern philosophy on defense. We're going to start with stopping people on the other side. We're not going to fall in love with a three-pointer. We're going to make probably some personnel changes. I think you need a kind of a take-charge coach. Is that Mazzulla? I don't think so, because I think you're asking him to grow a lot from the first year to second year. Unfortunately, in these playoffs, he has been lapped now by Quinn Snyder, Doc Rivers, and it's like a Ferrari against a Yugo with him and Eric Spoelstra. And I said, I think he will eventually be a good coach, but it might be time. He'll have plenty of teams interested in hiring him as a nice top assistant, and then he'll learn and maybe grow for his second job.
Yeah, Forsberg, I get what you're saying, that you don't want a ton of turnover, right? To not have institutional consistency probably doesn't help the inconsistency at all. I guess my fear would be that you're just running it back, and you mentioned it was such a short window, and that seems dangerous to me, Chris.
100%. And to me, it might just come down to what the core truly believes. Like, does Brad sit down with Jason and Jalen after this season and say, okay, like, is this the guy you want leading you forward? And if they're like, you know what, we just need to be pushed. We need a different voice, a different way. We need somebody who was more stern like Ime. If they just need that personality to be the defensive team they were, to have the we're not a track team swagger that they lost this year, then maybe you do have to make a change. I'm not completely ruling it out. I'm just saying it's hard for me to envision that you just keep churning and hoping and that you can find it. At some point, you got to settle on it and just hope that, you know, the core of your team is enough to figure it out. It's not an easy decision. Brad is in a tough spot. You know, again, I go back to it. Kind of went out there for this guy, and now he's going to go to ownership and say, you're going to pay him to go away. There's no easy answers with this based on this series, and yet so much of it falls back on just a complete failure of the organization to put this team in the right spot.
The mistake wasn't hiring him in the first place. They were between a rock and a hard place when they made that decision. It was giving him this extension. If they feel like they can't make a move now because they extended him and because they're going to have to pay him to go away, before they knew anything about the guy as a head coach outside of half a season in the regular season, that to me is a grave, grave error. And if what Gary is suggesting might be true is true, that Joe Mazzulla said, no, I don't want any help. I don't need any help. Then that to me is almost fireable in retrospect. If Brad Stevens is saying, we tried to get you help, man, you told me you didn't need it, and this is how it's going to look, I'm sorry, that shows a lack of awareness, that shows an immaturity that I don't think you want at the top of your organization. Now we're moving forward. Well,
speaking of immaturity, Brian Windhorst wrote this about Joe Mazzulla after the game last night. Mazzulla doth not protest too much. He was so over the top in trying to rip the attention toward himself and away from his team, a group that had played so lifelessly that his tactics were transparent. He's in the midst of learning many lessons in his first playoff as a head coach, and this was yet another one. There's an art to being a shield, and this wasn't it. There is a wave of anger from New England and a rising expectation elsewhere. Mazzulla will pay the price for this 0-3 hole the Celtics find themselves in. Gary, I honestly, though, I mean, I don't like it, but I haven't liked the way he's protected the players all year. But I don't know that yesterday was the place to reverse course. Like, what else does he do in that situation?
Yeah, Trudy, the whole, like, I didn't prepare the guys to play is writing your own obituary to me. That was like, Joe, I get it, what you're trying to do. You're trying to protect your players. You're trying to fall in the shield. You're trying to make sure they don't look at you and go, wow, you know, you just threw us under the bus. But he threw himself under the bus because if they weren't prepared, what game do you want them to be prepared for? Game 4? When you're down 0-3 and no team has ever come back in 149 series from being down 0-3, you might win a game and make it a little bit interesting and bring it back to the Garden, but 4 in a row? When are you going to be prepared? Like, that is the thing, and he wanted to stress before Game 2 to my question that, no, we were prepared. Game 1 before that third quarter barrage that won Miami the game. He wanted to emphasize, no, we were ready. And then to say in Game 3 we weren't ready, I think that's a guy kind of trying to figure out things and kind of losing his way and unsure how to approach what he because I'm sure he is not telling them lose by 28 points, don't close out the shooters, don't run back on defense. Hey, make sure you complain about every call. That really gets you more calls with officials. Like, I'm sure Tony Brothers loved Jason Tatum being in his ear all night. Like, I'm sure Joe did not tell his guys to do that, but they're doing it. They're reverting back to old habits. Jason was good with the officials for a while. Now everything is, I got hit on the hand. Oh, that's a block. Oh, boy, that's a foul. Oh, like, it's Jason, get back on defense. Like, that is coaching, and for Joe to say he's lost control, I think that's a testament to the lack of chemistry in that locker room.